The median rent in America in 2026 is $1,980. A month wage for the bottom half of American workers is around $18 an hour. Wage for the bottom half of American workers is around $18 an hour. That worker takes home about $2,100 after rent. They have $120 left. $120 to cover food, gas, utilities, insurance, and everything else a human being needs to stay alive. $120 for the entire month. $4 a day. Less than the cost of a coffee and a sandwich at any gas station in the country. The math does not work. It has not worked for years. The rent is too high. The wage is too low, and nobody in any position of power is doing anything about either one. The politicians talk about housing affordability, the way they talk about infrastructure and healthcare, and every other systemic failure that have been described as a crisis for 30 consecutive years without resolution. The words come, the conditions stay, and working-class Americans are doing what working-class Americans have always done when the system stops working for them. They are finding a way around it. Some of them are choosing vehicles. 350,000 Americans live in their vehicles full-time in 2026. They did the numbers, chose a van, stopped handing $2,000 a month to a landlord, and built a body of practical knowledge about how to live that way that almost nobody outside the community knows. They know where to park. They know how to stay warm. They know how to be invisible. They have figured out a version of survival that the system never intended to make available, and they are using it. But there is a smaller, quieter group doing something more permanent. They are not sleeping in parking lots. They are not rotating between hospital garages and Walmart lots waiting for a window to move on before someone asks them to leave. They are not managing condensation and carbon monoxide detectors and the coldest hour before sunrise. They are building on land they own, in a state where the rules that trap everyone else do not apply in the same way, do not reach as far, and in some cases do not exist at all. They're going off-grid in Alaska in 15 days for $8,000. The structure they are building is called a Quonset hut, a steel arch shell bolted together by two people with basic hand tools, sitting on a pier foundation engineered specifically for ground that would destroy a conventional concrete pour, insulated against temperatures that would kill an unprepared person in hours, and do so quietly enough that the person would never wake up to realize what was happening. It is not a cabin kit from a home improvement store. It is not a yurt or a shipping container or a tiny house on a trailer that still requires a place to park and a hookup and permission from someone who can revoke that permission on 30 days' notice. It is a permanent, insulated, legal homestead built for less than 4 months of median American rent. The reason most Americans have never heard of this build is the same reason most Americans have never heard of the specific tactics that make vehicle living survivable. The system does not teach it. The bank does not offer a brochure on Alaskan land acquisition in regions with no zoning authority. The building department does not hand you a pamphlet explaining where their jurisdiction ends and where you can build whatever you need without asking anyone's permission. The real estate industry does not advertise the existence of land that costs a few $1,000s an acre because the real estate industry makes its money on transactions involving land that costs 100 times that. The information lives with the people who have done it. It spreads the way all practical working class knowledge spreads, person to person, site to site, from the builder who figured it out the hard way to the person sitting across from them who is tired enough of the rent math to listen carefully. What follows is what they know. 7 specific insights that make a 15-day, $8,000 Alaskan off-grid build not just possible but repeatable. And 5 mistakes that end builds before they are finished. Cost people every dollar they brought with them. Destroy structures before the first winter is out and send newcomers back to the rent system they drove north specifically to escape. This is the blueprint. The land and the loophole. The first thing to understand about going off-grid in Alaska is that the state is not one place governed by one uniform set of rules. Alaska is divided into boroughs, which function roughly like counties in the lower 48. Some of those boroughs have governments. They have zoning departments and planning commissions and building inspectors with clipboards and permit offices where you submit drawings and wait and pay fees and wait again and revise and resubmit and wait some more. They have all the machinery that makes building anything slow, expensive, and dependent on the approval of people whose job it is to find reasons to withhold that approval until every box has been checked in the correct sequence. And then there is everything else. Roughly half of Alaska's total landmass falls under what is formerly called the unorganized borough. This is not a legal gray area. It is not a technicality sitting in a statute that a state legislature could clean up next session. It is a deliberate and permanent feature of Alaska's governing structure, a formal designation covering hundreds of thousands of square miles of the state's interior and remote regions, established and maintained because governing that land at the local level the way the lower 48 governs its rural areas is logistically and financially impossible. Nobody is going to build a permit office in a region that has more square miles than several eastern states combined and fewer permanent residents than a mid-sized American suburb. In the unorganized borough, there is no local zoning authority. There are no residential building codes. There is no permit to apply for, no inspector to schedule, no variance process to navigate, no neighbor position close enough to file a complaint that triggers a review. You can acquire land in the unorganized borough and erect a permanent residential structure on it legally without submitting a single piece of paperwork to a single local government office, because no local government office exists with jurisdiction over what you're building. For someone attempting to complete a build in 15 days on an $8,000 total budget, this is not a minor administrative convenience. It is the structural foundation of the entire plan. Every day spent waiting for a permit is a day of weather eaten from the build window, a day of budget consumed by accommodation and meals, and the slow bleed of carrying costs, a day of momentum lost that is genuinely difficult to recover. The unorganized borough eliminates that clock entirely. The clock that remains is the one you set yourself, and the one Alaska's weather sets for you, which is a clock worth respecting. The land itself is the second part of the equation, and the part that surprises most people when they encounter the actual numbers for the first time. Alaska has more federally and state-managed public land than any other state in the country, and it is not a close comparison. The Bureau of Land Management administers millions of acres in Alaska, portions of which are available for permitted long-term use, homestead-adjacent claims, and in some cases direct purchase at prices that bear no relationship to anything in the lower 48 real estate market. State land sales run periodically through Alaska's Department of Natural Resources and offer remote parcels at prices that would be considered impossible or fraudulent if they appeared in a listing for property in any contiguous American state. Private parcels in remote regions of the unorganized borough trade at prices that reflect their distance from services rather than their intrinsic value as land, which means acreage that would cost six figures in rural Montana or rural Tennessee, can be acquired in Alaska for a few $1,000s, or in some cases considerably less. The combination of zero local building codes and ultra-cheap land acquisition is what makes the $8,000 total budget real, rather than aspirational. In the lower 48, an $8,000 building budget is not a building budget. It is a down payment on a permit process. It is a preliminary architectural drawing, and a site survey, and a soil report, and the first of several fees paid to a municipality that will take 8 to 14 months to tell you whether you are allowed to build a structure you already designed and paid to have engineered. $8,000 in the lower 48 does not get you a foundation. It does not get you walls. It barely gets you started on the administrative process that precedes construction in a system designed at every level to require professional intermediaries who charge for their time and whose involvement is legally mandated whether or not their contribution improves the final structure. In the Alaskan unorganized borough, $8,000 gets you land, a structural shell, a foundation system, insulation, a heating system, a water storage solution, and a first night inside a permanent home that nobody can evict you from, nobody can raise a rent on, and nobody can take from you as long as you pay whatever minimal property tax applies to your specific parcel, which in many remote Alaskan regions is functionally zero. That is not a theoretical comparison. That is the actual difference between what the same $8,000 buys in two different regulatory environments. The money is identical. The outcome is not remotely the same. Now, the 15-day timeline, because 15 days sounds like a number chosen for marketing purposes, and it is worth explaining precisely why it is not. The 15-day window exists for 3 reasons that have nothing to do with how the number sounds in a headline. The first reason is weather. Alaska's most productive building windows occur in the shoulder seasons, the periods between the deep freeze of interior winter and the saturated ground conditions of spring thaw. These windows are real and they are compressed. In many parts of the Alaskan interior, the window between workable ground conditions and the first serious freeze runs 8 to 10 weeks. Within that window, a builder who arrives without a clear daily plan and pre-staged materials will spend 2 of those weeks making decisions that should have been made before departure. A builder who arrives with everything staged, every decision already made, every material already sourced and priced, can complete a livable structure in 15 days and have time remaining in the window to address the details that only become visible once the structure is standing. The second reason is budget discipline. A build without a hard daily timeline tends to expand in ways that each seem individually reasonable and are collectively ruinous. A second trip to town for a forgotten component costs half a day and $60 in fuel. 3 of those trips cost a day and a half and $180. A decision deferred on site because the information to make it was not gathered before arrival costs 2 days of research and a night of sleeping in the truck while the answer gets sorted out. None of these delays is catastrophic on its own. Combined, they turn a 15-day build into a 5-week build, and a 5-week build in the shoulder season is a build that does not finish before the weather changes. The third reason is momentum. Construction momentum is a real phenomenon that experienced builders understand and protect. The first 3 days of a build establish a pace, a rhythm, a pattern of decisions and physical progress that carries forward into everything that follows. A build that moves quickly in the first week tends to continue moving quickly. A build that stalls in the first week for any reason, waiting on a delivery, waiting on weather, waiting on a decision that was not made in advance, tend to continue stalling. The 15-day structure forces every decision to be made before the build starts, every material to be on site before the first pier goes in ground, every step to be sequenced before the first day of work begins. Nothing gets figured out on site. Everything gets executed on site. That distinction between a build where decisions are made in the field under physical and financial pressure and a build where decisions were made in advance and are simply being carried out is the difference between 15 days and 6 months. It is the difference between an $8,000 completed structure and a half-finished shell sitting in the Alaska interior that cost $14,000 before the builder had to leave and has not been touched since. Understanding the rent math is what gets someone to Alaska. Understanding what the unorganized borough makes legally possible is what gets them commit to the idea. Understanding the land market is what makes the budget real. And understanding why the 15-day timeline is a discipline rather than a deadline is what makes the difference between people who complete the build and people who go home with foundation, and a story about how it almost worked out. The experienced builders who have done this carry a specific kind of knowledge. They drove north with a trailer. They set a foundation in unfamiliar ground under conditions they had never worked in before. They assembled a structure they had never assembled before. They insulated it, heated it, sealed it against conditions that do not exist anywhere else in the continental American experience. And they were sleeping inside a weather-tight permanent structure before the second week ended. They share a pattern. They made the same decisions in the same order. They avoided the same failures. They came back with a body of knowledge that is not written in any contractor's manual or homesteading guide or permaculture curriculum, because none of those resources were written for the specific combination of structure, ground, climate, and budget. What they know is what follows. The land is free or close to it. The codes do not apply. The shell costs $3,500 and goes up in 72 hours with 2 people and hand tools. The foundation worked without concrete, without a mixer, without a contractor, and without the weeks of curing time that a concrete pour requires before it can be loaded. And the ground preparation that determines whether any of it lasts takes 1 day and a clear understanding of why it cannot be skipped under any circumstance, regardless of how solid the ground looks in August when you are standing on it for the first time. That is what the land and the loophole give you: the permission to build, the land to build on, the budget to build with, and the timeline to build it before the window closes. Everything after that is construction, and the construction is where the 7 insights and the 5 mistakes live.